Okay, our next talk is being given by David Barnhart, who is the research professor and director of the Space Technology and Systems Center. And his talk is titled Satbotics Control, Connecting Biologically Inspired Spacecraft Together. So David.
Afternoon, thanks very much. You can get the next slide. Big thanks to the Kestons, of course, for this, because this is it was great fun, and definitely the students that aren't here that participated in it is a big thank you as well. Quick top level introduction. Since this is the first time I've seen a lot of ISI folks, believe it or not, there is a live satellite at Marina del Rey at ISI in a clean room at ISI in Marina del Rey. I leave it to you to figure out and find it. I'll leave it at that. I'm lucky enough that working at ISI, but I also have a collaborative activity with the astronautics department and such. We've created this thing called the Space Engineering Research Center, so you'll see CERC sort of talked about with that, but it's really a code name for the space activity at ISI. The team that participated in this particular project were graduate students in particular, although I have pulled in some undergraduate students. The cool thing is that several of them have graduated. One of them actually got his master's thesis because of this very project, so that was pretty cool. All right, next black platform. So, great, space. Why is space cool, fun, or important? The big thing is you guys are utilizing space as you sit in here. It's become ubiquitous within the banking sector, believe it or not, for transactions between different countries related to that. And then, of course, everybody knows when you Google yourself to find this location, you're essentially utilizing maps and systems that have come from the satellites. That's great. The future is even bigger. The future of crazy power beaming and solar farms in space, or depots, interplanetary transport, which we'd love to be able to get to, lunar habitats, et cetera. That's all wonderful, and that's really coming. So that's actually really cool. Next chart, though, turns out the way we build space platforms, we are definitely on track to hit that $1 trillion number. That's basically the GDP of a small country. The interesting thing is today, if you put today's dollars for the International Space Station that was built basically over the last 2 and 3 decades, which was about $110, $140 billion, it's almost 5 times that. So, and I'll sort of give you a perspective as to why that's important here in a second. But my argument is, or hypothesis, we have to come up with a different thought process if we really want to build big for the future. All right, so to give you some perspective, let's go to the next chart. And let's look at what the humans on Earth have built, because I think that's sort of a good starting point. So if you hit the next button, we'll see that the Egyptians back in the biblical times, all the way up to the French in the European times, as well as the latest and greatest, the Burj Khalifa in the Middle East, they built some really big stuff, and it's awesome, right? That's really cool. So now let me lay over it. Oh, you hit the button too fast. You're taking my story away. Come on. Okay, now let me lay over it. The International Space Station, which is huge, right? So now hit the button. And this is the one that, Sandra Bullock was in her underwear flying around, things were dying. How big is it? I have just compared that apples to apples to exact size relative to the things that we've built on the Earth. As I stand here, I have to tell you that I'm incredibly depressed and pissed off that as a space person, that's all we do? It's less than the Egyptians in the biblical days, right? All right. So my thesis is I want to grow big stuff in space, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to afford it the way we currently do it. So what can we do? Next chart. Well, I'm going to look to you all. Something that I was lucky enough to start when I was at DARPA, and then I tried to bring it here. Look at you guys. You're amazing creatures. And it all starts with a single cell, and millions of them all add up to these really complex, yes, sometimes crazy, individuals in front of you, right? So why can't we duplicate that relative to this mechanical, cyber, hard system in space? So that's the premise. The premise is we use biological aggregation to inspire the methodology by which to build satellites, aka next generation very large space systems. So okay, next chart. Our specific Keston research then was to dive as deep as possible to figure out, could we create or could we begin to explore a computational nervous system, if you will. The cool thing about what happens in you guys' bodies all the time is as you're growing, the cells are connecting and you don't have to talk to them, you don't have to write code for them. It happens automatically. Why can't we do that in satellites? So The team and I, we sort of looked at it and said, well, this is a pretty big task. A lot of folks have tried this over the last 20 years. I can tell you it's still being tried down the way at SMC. So we broke it down into two particular parts. The bottom part of the picture that you see there, in essence, was to come up with the plug and play network, if you will. The method to connect hardware or cyber-physical systems together that then recognizes that, hey, I am a reaction wheel, or hey, I'm a star tracker, or whatever it might be, right? So that was the first step. And then on top of that, which is the top part of this chart, would essentially be what I would consider the apps. So once you're able to connect all these different kinds of hardwares together, you got to play them, right? You have to figure out how to make them work. So, again, I sort of think, I'm not a computer scientist, shocking as that might be, I sort of think apps is the right kind of approach. So that's the approach we took. We use the nomenclature aggregation architecture and aggregation behavior. All right, as with all good experimental progress, you have mixed results. So if we go to the next chart, the first thing we sort of looked at was hardware. Could we sort of put all this stuff on the table that we have in the circ and different plays and say, work? Well, developing that particular architecture was difficult, primarily because none of these things traditionally today are meant to work together without being specifically hard-coded and interfaced and connected together. It's different, a satellite is different than a laptop. A laptop, you can plug in a mouse, almost anybody can do it here, and the laptop will recognize that's a mouse, and it'll go find a driver and then begin to run that. Doesn't happen in spacecraft. They're all sort of custom built. So we tried. The one thing that we did sort of uncover was a data transport layer that we thought we could make work across a bunch of different cyber-physical systems, but we couldn't quite get the hardware to work together or to make real-time operating system processors all specifically work together. There's a lot of really good stuff going on at ISI, which we did try to reach out to. I actually had the students give a presentation. We talked with Eric Klein's group in particular to get some ideas. So anyway, we couldn't quite do it. However, the next one, in terms of results, we did demonstrate the aggregation behavior. So that was really cool. We have a test bed at the circ itself. Things float around, which is great. We made a model. We said, here's how a spacecraft works. We said, OK, now stick another one together. And we want it to operate as a monolithic entity. Doesn't matter how many things connect together, and it has to do it automatically. So it turns out we were able to do it in simulation. So we said, great, let's try to write some code and make it work. So the next chart, and there's a video you might be able to play. What you're going to look at is crude. There's no question about it. But it's going to hopefully show you that these two satellite systems, these float bots, are operating together as if they are one. And there was no specific code that was written. We wrote the app that allowed to share the resources, because each one, when it by itself, would rotate it. And if you tried to run each one by itself, it would tear itself apart. But we were able to at least show from the guidance, navigation, control standpoint that yes, it's possible to merge an application, which is typically complex, from two different entities into one, and it roughly worked. We're using $15 valves, so things didn't exactly move around correctly, but that's all right. OK, so sort of the next chart is our overall accomplishments and presentations, because we did try to do a bunch of stuff. The students were able to provide a presentation into ISI, which I think it was useful. I was invited to Oxford University to give a presentation on this, not by the astronautics guys, but by the computer science guys, because they thought, wow, man, that's really cool. What if we could put vacuum cleaners together, or cars, or something else, right? So they were sort of thinking out of the box, which was great. We demonstrated it. We did give a paper at the International Astronautical Congress, which literally just occurred at the beginning of the year, which all the students participated. And as I indicated to you, one of the students actually defended his master's thesis on this very project. He was the one that actually did the aggregation behavior, which was cool. Next steps, sort of way forward. Right at the very end, there were more students that sort of understood what we were doing, and they were like, holy crap, we think we got ideas about how we can solve that problem. I said, great, come on out. We have no more money, but that's all right. Come on out. We'll be able to do it. So we're actually setting up a test bed, and we're going to take a step back and look at this statically. And they actually have some really good ideas about it. And in addition, we actually were able to come up with a bit cleaner design related to the dynamic Satbots as opposed to a bit of the dirty one you saw, so that we can be more precise in how we can test this as we go forward. So thanks very much, everybody. Hey, yes.
Great talk. Awesome. I'm curious about how the higher level behavior evolves. Is it a top-down sort of planning approach once you hook the things together, or is it a more bottom-up subsumption approach where they kind of figure out organically how to work together?
Yeah, no, it's a, so what's interesting is that satellites, you can break them out. I mean, it's fascinating. It's almost like the biological cells where there are there's types, nerve cells, movement cell, propulsion cell. Each one has functions. One has to move, one has to work. So what we did, at least with the first demonstration, was for guidance, navigation, control, we wrote a set of functions for guidance, navigation, control that was allowed to go pulse to find out if you have some other thrusters. If you do, then you understand what the topology was and you automatically map into that topology. So I'm not sure if that's bottom up or top down, but it was the code that was written in the algorithms that sat on top of the processors that were both on the Satbots that recognized each other, and once they knew there was another one to it, then they automatically ran that. So I think of it as an app. I could be wrong. So anyway.
I have a question. Why don't we use FPGAs? I mean, it's a reroutable hardware. We can send it instead of like taking down satellites and sending new technology all the time. Why not just use FPGAs and just connect them together and just change the hardware, write new software, write new lower level?
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful question. So what I didn't indicate going forward was our challenge was to take legacy hardware in the industry at the moment. Like I said, there's actually been a number of folks that have taken a stab, both from the government and industry, to change every component that goes into a spacecraft and put on what some people call that an applique, which I would argue you could put an FPGA on, right? And then that would solve the problem, but then it was a proprietary solution, and basically the manufacturers didn't build enough of their stuff that they were like, we're not gonna do that. You're gonna make it do this, and somebody else doesn't wanna do that. So what we try to do is how do we think about the current state of the industry and utilize it without implementing or inserting saying you have to use this particular approach. It's a valid point, valid question. So, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, cool. Thanks very much. Thanks.